Our lessons on basic perspective for beginners, and we're using handouts from Brenda Hodnett of Fine Art Publishers in Halifax, Canada to help us learn this concept. Now, last time we were here, we looked at a rectangular prism drawn in perspective, and today we're going to learn how to create that rectangular prism above, below, and on the horizon line. Here's a little bit more about what that means. When an artist or an observer is standing looking out at the horizon line and they're focused on that one vanishing point, then objects above them in the air, like a plane or a bird, would be above the horizon line. Objects like buildings that are right in that artist or observer's line of sight are on the horizon line. And objects down below you, if you were standing up on a building or if you were looking down at a small object like a shoebox, those are said to be below the horizon line. So it depends on where the artist is standing and also where the object is positioned. Like we see in this illustration, your eye level, the level of your eyes, is the horizon line, and that's the way we're going to proceed for this drawing activity as you're focusing on a vanishing point in the distance. Now in SketchBook, let's begin by taking two fingers to pinch and zoom out. We're reducing our aspect ratio on our drawing surface to about 90%. This is going to allow us to draw a line of perspective and draw it all the way across, all the way off into that gray drawing area. And let me reposition that. So you see a little bit of the gray drawing area at the top underneath the toolbar. That's really important, and underneath at the bottom. Now the first icon that we're going to use here is the layers icon. Let's review all the SketchBook Express icons. Please repeat each one after me. Gallery. Add new sketch. I for information. Undo arrow, redo arrow, brush editor, draw styles, free draw, line tool, rectangle tool, circle tool, symmetry, text, transform, and layers. When you open up your layers palette, you get a few different icons. The plus lets you add a new layer. Plus plus would copy the layer you're on. Flower plus brings in a picture from your photo library, and the arrow merges layers. The first thing I'm going to do is use plus to create a second layer, and flower plus to bring in a picture from my photo library. And the picture that I want to use is a photo of a grid. A grid is an artist's tool. It helps him or her create artwork that is completely parallel and perpendicular. Artists can use it in other ways too to make sure that they get appropriate proportion in their artwork. So today I'm going to use it as a background. I need to move it behind or beneath my blue layer, so I'm going to grab these two rectangles on the right hand side until I see that layer is highlighted. Then I can change the order of my layers. I can move that layer down to below. Whatever is on top in the layers palette is what you see first. Now I also want to reduce the opacity of my blue layer. I can select either one by tapping on it, and I get a blue rectangle around it that lets me know it's selected. So let me turn down the opacity on my drawing layer to about 75%. Doesn't have to be exactly on 75. But now I can see my grid behind it, and that's going to help me create lines that are parallel and perpendicular today. The first one I want to create is my horizon line. So I'm going to use the line tool to get a straight line, start all the way off of my drawing surface, and I do not have to be exactly on one of those lines on the grid, but I need to try to stay the same distance off of it. And start out here in the gray drawing area's workspace and draw all the way off of the drawing area onto the workspace. So you get that line fully across then you can use fill bucket and green to fill your earth with green, your sky is blue. Again, as we're learning about perspective and the horizon line, it's good to know that vocabulary and how it applies to our drawing. So let me add in that word horizon. Of course, when you get text, you always get the last thing you type, which in this case was linear perspective for me. So let me tap the X to remove that and type in horizon. The horizon is the line in our vision. I'll use move text to move it with my stylus. Horizon is that line in our vision where the sky appears to meet the ground. I'm done. Now that word's locked in there. Unless I press undo arrow to take it away, it's not going to move. The other thing that I need on my drawing is a vanishing point. So allow me to use the paintbrush. It's going to give me a larger radius dot than the line I was drawing with. We're going to exaggerate it just slightly for our purposes today. I'm going to put one dot on my horizon. So far, this is what we did last week in art. That's my horizon line. One small dot is all I need. However, today we're going to do something a little bit differently. Please use your pen tool and turn the radius down so it's a very narrow stroke. Today we're going to do at least 3 rectangular prisms. We're going to do one rectangular prism that is on the horizon line, one rectangular prism that is below the horizon line, and I'd like you to make these rectangles different sizes, and one rectangle prism that is above the horizon line, like it's flying or floating. Now let's go back to our handout from Brenda Hodnett. Now, please note that that horizon line, it must be parallel to the top and the bottom of our drawing area. That's one of the reasons we're working with the grid, so we get it perfectly parallel. Then we'll use the line tool to draw lines from each of the vertices that correspond to that vanishing point and draw them in, like the ones in the picture. Now, the challenge for us last week was getting lines that were exact right angles perpendicular to that horizon line. So all of these vertical lines that we needed to get perfectly straight up and down, perpendicular to the horizon, were presenting challenges for us. Hopefully we'll be more successful this week working with the grid. So let's begin. Let's use that line tool and let's draw a line from each one of these vertices to the vanishing point. And I want them to all touch perfectly on the corners and perfectly down here. If you don't like the way they turn out, just tap undo arrow to try again. It may help you as you work with each one to zoom in so you can get right on that corner and line up right exactly with the vanishing point. Now, this rectangular prism that is on the horizon line only gets 2 lines. The one above the horizon line will get 3, and the one below the horizon line will get 3. Again, if you don't like the way your line connects, just tap undo arrow and try it again. Sometimes it takes me a few tries to get my line positioned exactly like I want it. Undo. Now this one's going to be very tough to get that line that is perpendicular to the horizon. So now when I look at my artwork, I can see where I need the other edges of each one of these rectangular prisms. For my piece that is in the worm's eye view, in other words, I'm a worm down here on the ground. Let's draw a worm. Let's make it green. So, if I were a worm down here on the ground, then that's my perspective. The worm is looking up, and he can see part of the bottom of this shape. That's my worm's eye view. Let's put our other edges on this rectangular prism with the line tool. You can make it as large as you want. Just make sure you follow one of the lines on your grid. Last week, a lot of us were getting lines that were angled like that. That's what we want to avoid this week. That's why we're working with that grid and we're lining up perfectly on the lines from the grid. For our rectangular prism that is on the horizon line, match up with one of the lines on the grid and create your other edge. And finally, this is your bird's eye view rectangular prism. Here's why we call it a bird's eye view rectangular prism. If you were a bird up in the sky and you were looking down at this rectangular prism, here's my bird. He's looking down. He sees the top and the front face of this rectangular prism on the ground. Again, we'll use our line tool and zoom in so we get a precise line that runs along one of the lines of our grid. That helps make that line perfectly parallel to the top edge and perfectly parallel to our horizon line. Then we're going to do another vertical line going precisely down the lines of our grid. That line is now perfectly perpendicular, 90 degrees to our horizon line. A right angle is 90 degrees. $90. Now, as you can see in these illustrations, you can create linear perspective with all kinds of letters and 3D shapes like this cylinder. We will use the idea of linear perspective to help us create a city landscape where all the points converge. So when you look at our illustration on SketchBook and you see a lot of lines that are all converging, understand that that's going to happen in our drawing, and we are going to spend some time erasing on SketchBook. However, for right now, those lines serve as guides for us. When you're ready to erase them, you can use any drawing tool. I'm going to continue to use the pen and the line tool and pick up that color by pressing and holding until you get the target, and then very carefully draw straight lines in that color blue back down your lines of linear perspective. You can also do this with free draw. Now, my lines may not be exactly the same color because we changed the opacity since we began. But I want you to understand this is an important step in our work. When we actually create our city landscape, we can do a new layer on top so those erasure marks don't occur whatsoever. So those are our 3 rectangular prisms above the horizon line, on the horizon line, and below the horizon line.